All right, there we go. Welcome, everybody. My name is John Buck. I'm here with Yuri, author of Answers in Simulation. This science fiction novel that's kind of based around this character that comes to, I don't know, I don't know, maybe you want to give a little bit of a lowdown for it, but I just finished it recently. If you want to kind of
Yeah,
get.
yeah. Hi guys. Yeah, I came to write this book about 3 or 4 years ago, but the questions about our world come all the way back when I was like kid, like 10 years old or something. And my career, I'm not a philosopher or novelist or anything. I actually in software development
Mm.
for my whole life, and also trained electrical engineer. So completely different field, but I always had questions about big topics like that. And at certain point when I learned about physics enough, about quantum physics specifically, it really started to come all together. And then more research into these topics online and so on. And I saw some other people came to the same conclusions. And all that together, plus on the other side, I'm very logical and practical person, but I encountered a few people in my life, including my wife and a few other remarkable people that spawned like not just cold-blooded logical conclusions about certain things, but more like inspirational and something literally beyond our normal logical mind can explain. And that kind of gave birth to idea to write a book about what I think. And I think it all came together through this character, Rabi. Um, it's quite interesting book too, because it kind of addresses modern problems the young generation have. I have kids of my own. The oldest one is 15 years old, and I can see struggles he already starts to face,
Mhm.
and his friends as well. So you probably, if you read the book, John, you probably noticed a
Oh
few
yeah.
topics I touch in that direction as well.
Yeah, while going through it, it's very easy to find Robbie very relatable for somebody living in today's kind of age and kind of having that sort of sense of uncertainty and anxiety for, I don't know, existence and also the curiosity that he has as well, which is very cool to see. So, I don't know, what I guess led you into kind of learning more about quantum physics? Like, was it sort of like, did you have this interest in it prior to it, or was it something that kind of came to you
We
that you
studied
wanted to
it.
delve into?
Yeah, I had a course in actually in university when I studied electrical engineering, and we had a small course on that. And I knew the topics, but never thought about them in deep enough. We got the formulas
Mm-hmm.
essentially, and it was pretty hard to remember the formulas and passing exams. So just standard thing. But
Mm-hmm.
now later, like when I was 30 plus years old, I started to relate back to those times and think deeper about these things. So why it is like that? The most important question is why. Why we have this duality? What is the purpose of it? There has to be a reason behind anything, and the only real reason was if you connect the dots between programming, optimization, and graphics, and what we have with waves and particle duality. Those two are like literally come hand in hand, and um, that is probably the most important one. But then I started to study deeper things about entanglement, and especially recently, this decade actually. I mean, previous decade, it's 2020 now, but previous decade, there were huge breakthroughs in entanglement. There were direct confirmations that it exists um, at huge distances. And that entanglement thing only makes sense if you think about information, because of course, guys, you can study deeper in these topics, but the main point of entanglement is that any interaction, when you touch with your hand a wall, uh,
Mm-hmm.
particles in your fingers touch and interact with the wall particles. So this is your interaction, and everything is interaction at lowest level with these particles. And particles, when they interact, any two particles, they actually don't exist in specific place at any moment in time. So they're kind of blurred. But when they do interact, they immediately register a specific location and exchange certain properties between each other. So when particles interact, they actually start to be entangled, and that entanglement is like a balance sheet. Your assets and your liabilities. You exchange the information between the two, and then now one single system. So information cannot explode, because if they didn't entangle, one particle touch another particle, touch another particle, the information to contain within the world would be explosive. It will go exponentially big. But because there is this exchange, information is not exploding in size. You can watch some of my videos or read on the internet about this, but that is a very interesting philosophical point. So that these things, like there's a lot of information on the internet about double slit experiment, all these things that probably you know already. But there are some more developments, especially in entanglement area just recently, which only reconfirm my belief that we live in simulated world. And physics, especially on our side here. So, yeah.
Right. Maybe I should explain to the audience, because this is not exactly something usual for this channel. It's normally just a channel for discussions on philosophy or different YouTube lectures that we watch. But maybe like several months back, participated in a debate on the Think Club channel, where I was arguing in favor of the simulation hypothesis. And I was originally doing it only just as a exploratory attempt to kind of learn more about the hypothesis itself, just because I had heard like partial things from like people like Elon Musk and Nick Bostrom. I think his conversation with Joe Rogan, and so getting a kind of sense of it, and what I wanted to do was get a better understanding of like what are the actual arguments to it. And so I put myself into the process of arguing in favor of the debate. And after doing it, I came in contact with you on Twitter. I guess part of that same Twitter sphere, I guess. But I was just kind of curious, what do you think are maybe, I guess, sort of the main pieces of evidence that you think points more towards simulation, living in a simulated world than in the real world, I guess?
Yeah, in my book, I give 10 the most convincing, in my opinion, arguments. And not all of them is about physics, but also philosophical arguments. If you read a book from Rhys Burke, which came last year, he gives even more arguments for that. So if you just go through that book, it gives more points on top of that. But like if you go non-technical, so in technical, I just touched about duality of light, or not just light, any particles, and uncertainty principle and entanglement. Those are physical ones. But then there are non-physical ones which kind of fit very well. Is Fermi paradox. The point everybody probably familiar with is that mathematically and probabilistically we should have received some signals from other civilization, because life quite probable given number of planets and given the age before light reaches our planet. There are very ancient civilizations that should exist already, and so universe is completely silent, and we just cannot understand why. That would be another point. Of course, it is silent because it's all about us, our little world, and not about seemingly infinite world outside, which might not be at all infinite or huge. So that is another one. Then life itself. I give a lot of arguments in my book about meaning, what life is and why does it exist. And Robbie, in the first chapter, I think, he looks at the sky and he observes those clouds there. And they're beautiful, the clouds. And if you went to mountains, I love mountains, but I go to mountains often. I love mountains, but it's enough to like have a picnic or so, and then you get bored with them because they don't change much. This is anything that is not life is actually boring. Very quickly it gets boring. and only life is interesting. So why would life exist? So to entertain or to give some interesting points. So that is life itself is the reason, in my opinion. And if you look at DNA itself, so now we go a little bit technical. I literally had to spend quite a lot of time studying the biology. I'm not a biologist at all, but I had to do that to write a book. And there are plenty of biologists, professional biologists, that actually think DNA couldn't have formed by itself. I mean, it is a program. DNA is a biological program that there is the only one more or less credible theory how DNA could have formed over time, and that is RNA world theory. But it's not. It doesn't have that widespread support at all, and literally it's a mystery how first cell appeared. There is no question about how evolution happened after the first cell. That there are mechanisms that could, because it is self-replicating and changing, mutating, the evolution could have happened. So there is no argument there. But the first cell itself, to start this process of evolution, is a huge mystery to all. And because it looks so much like program, I think somebody programmed it. So that is another argument. And there are plenty of other arguments that, again, you can read in my book, and also Reed's work, another good book that you can read to get more evidence, evidential support on that. So that's we can dive in any topic if you're interested.
Yeah. Thanks. One of the interesting things that, like, just in checking out your channel, I know probably the most, I guess, famous argument for a simulation hypothesis is Nick Bostrom's, where he kind of sets out this trilemma of where we are either, well, maybe you can explain the trilemma. I'm sure.
I have a whole video on that, and I'm trying to use simple words to explain that. And Bostrom is an incredible guy. He's like writes like a philosopher. I read his whole argument article. The point is essentially trilemmas, and you are more professional in philosophy than me, but essentially it's the same as mathematics. You have certain statements, and then you either calculate probability of these statements to be true, false, and so on. So he says essentially that there are 2 points. The civilization, as it progresses, it can have a will to essentially start a simulation, and it might not have that will. So that is first statement in his trilemma. Then the second statement is that civilization can reach the point where it can simulate, or it cannot reach the point where it can simulate. So that is second statement. And then the third statement is the probability that the VA in simulation is close to 1. So the point here is that if the first 2 are true, the second one is most certainly true. And that is, in simple words, you can explain it the following way. Look, we are developing all these computer games, and popularity of simulation is definitely connected to explosion of gaming. So because humans can now see how realistic games are, if you project a few years ahead, oh wow, they will be so realistic, and what stops us from making super realistic so we can like play for a few years and forget we are in simulation. So the point is the progress is not stopped, and it continues, and that is your first statement. The second statement is moral one. So we want to run a simulation. That is very difficult to judge, but point is, in my video I give argument, okay, if even majority, if you have technology to do simulation, and if majority morally agrees, okay, let's not run it because it's immoral, then it's just enough to have a few members of our society with the technology to start the simulation, right? And when they started, if that world within the simulation progresses, that world can explode with other intelligence that creates its own simulation. And then the T, I call it T of simulation. So simulation within simulation within simulation, it can explode. And then again, Bostrom's formula comes true. And again, number of simulations is much bigger than number of real based reality objects. And that's it, you in simulation. So that's why both of those arguments are kind of likely, and therefore the third one is also very likely. And Bostrom actually gives a formula to calculate, and I explained that formula in the video I have, how to actually calculate the actual probability we live in simulation, put into numbers. But I also, if you watch the video, I actually criticize him as well, because that is not a full set. So in mathematics, it's a little bit complicated now how to explain it in simple words, but in mathematics, sum of all possible events has to equal to 1. And I don't believe that in that trilemma, those three statements describe all events. That's why I call there has to be also X in that formula, because there could be force unknown to us currently events that prevent us. And I give an example in the video of is a network card where a hacker can hack into higher level simulation, hack it, and then formula that gives us the probability actually will be invalid in that case. Yeah.
So if it is the case that it isn't just this top-down situation, but rather I guess, bottom-up, where the simulated worlds can actually interact with the larger world, then that kind of changes the probabilities?
Yes, it is, because then, like if you can consider the case with hacking through the network card example that I gave, you essentially being in a lower level simulation hacking to higher level, and actually you can go all the way up to base reality and change some rules within that simulation or shut it down. Then the probabilities that calculate the formula of Bostrom calculates actually not valid anymore. You, for example, if you decide to close it down, shut it down, then there will be 0. There are no simulation. You just shut it down. Or if you decide not to shut it down but change the rules of some sort, again, maybe you will just be the only one living the simulation, and then it's another probability. So that affects the formula, and that's what I say. His trilemma does not describe all possible events. It's not full set, not 1, not equal to 1. I don't know what it equal to. It could be 0.9 or it could be 0.009. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of one of the things that I was thinking of. Like, I know in your book you kind of laid out this test that the simulated people or this test that they run to test whether or not they're within the real world or in the simulated world, where like within a simulated world things are run probabilistically, where like the electron might be in one of these places but it doesn't actually exist in one of those places until you actually measure it. Whereas in the real world, it wouldn't run probabilistically, but yes, things actually exist as they are in a sort of Newtonian fashion. And it was interesting. It raised like a question for like, because that's one of the things I was wondering is like, how would you be able to tell if you were in the real world or within a simulated world, especially with the added, I guess, problem of like, you wouldn't need to load the entirety of the universe all at once. Like you could be like a brain in a vat or something like that, or just like a singular person inside of a universe to make it appear as if the world behaved Newtonistically or something like that without the probabilities popping it. And so I don't know, it seems like even then you wouldn't be able to tell for sure that you were within the real world.
Yeah, we cannot tell for sure, obviously, but everything can be estimated like how likely it is. So we cannot be absolutely certain in anything. Again, we can all go away to solipsism and maybe nothing exists except me. Everything is possible. Let's face it that way. It's a question of how likely. So point is, since we discover all these optimizations in our real world now, how likely this world is actually absolute? It's very unlikely if we consider the evidence we have. So that is the point. And very good that you noticed that experiment I had in the book, because I try to point out that in absolute real world, there is no need, there's simply no need for optimizations. And the distances can be any, the speeds can be any, the size can be any. And in our real world now, where we live, or we think it's real, nothing is like that. Everything is limited by Planck constant. Planck constant in physics limits everything: time, space, mass, energy. Everything is quantized, and that is very, very strong evidence that our world is not absolute, is not base reality at all. It's on top of all other evidence like duality of light again and entanglement. So that is true, and the experiment they described that is described in the book is this cloud with tiny dots, and they track their position over time. That each dot, each tiny dot, actually stays where it is. So we actually could conduct experiments in this our current world that could prove it, but nobody gives funding. And in one of the videos, I argue that guys, we spent money on investigating this multiverse and parallel universe and all these other theories, holographic universe. People get money, they work in this, but nobody, by some reason, touches the simulation theory. But there are plenty of experiments you could do to actually try to prove further that we live in such a world. So
yeah, that's kind of the thing I see sometimes surrounding this type of discussion is there's almost a automatic, I guess, dismissal of it in certain ways. For some reason people give that they think that the simulation hypothesis kind of like removes any sort of meaning to their lives, because like, oh, if the whole world is like a hologram or a simulation, then what's kind of the point? Like, why not just go walk in front of a truck or something like that just to kind of test the hypothesis? But there is, I don't know. Why do you think that maybe there's that apprehension, I guess, to the idea of the simulation hypothesis?
Oh, I actually know exactly why. I was involved in some Twitter conversations with people, and I clearly see that people don't feel comfortable with it because it assumes a creator, somebody actually watching their every move, every their decision is analyzed possibly, and that is very very unpleasant for majority of people, I think. And another point is science was very materialistic since ancient Greece, and people really scientific community kind of dismisses the concept of God, and we live in this materialistic world. This is changing, by the way. In the last few decades, we have quite a few people like Tegmark and this other guy from Caltech, forgot his name. There are actual physicists that write books and post videos explaining things about information universe, possibly that materialistic vision of world is actually not the right vision. It could be information that drives everything. I don't want to go in that direction because that is, to me, slightly different field than simulation, but it's very correlated. But yes, this feeling of being watched, of being analyzed and possibly judged when the life ends is very, very difficult for most people, and very much connected to God concept. Mm-hmm. And
that's kind of the really interesting thing about simulation hypothesis is it's almost like a quasi return to religiosity within the modern world, where you'll get like kind of strange, like very scientific and modern people like Elon Musk or Nick Bostrom or Neil deGrasse Tyson. And there's this talk about the simulation hypothesis, which kind of like brings back in a lot of the kind of older concepts that maybe were kind of like left off out of the scientific picture for a long time.
And I think it will change. It's like there are always shifts. Like we shifted from classical Newtonian physics to quantum physics. There is some shifts starting only now, last few decades. And physics is and science in general is quite conservative and slow. So I think it's just early beginning of us shifting to information physics. And I think the pioneer in this was Konrad Zuse. It's a German physicist who initially introduced the concept of digital physics, and that was like very early pioneer kind of breakthrough in that area. But more and more books in this field are coming from real PhD physicists now, and I think it's just laying the foundation, and we'll see a mainstream physics picking up over time, maybe next decade in that direction. So I will not be surprised. Majority of like now 20-year-olds, when they are 40-year-olds or so, it will be actually mainstream, and nobody will question that. So I think so. But again, that is physics, and that's what raised my curiosity to write the book. But really, what I'm interested in human nature and search for meaning of life, and that's what I try to kind of concentrate on in the book. So book is not technical, just to point out, it's not at all a technical book. If you want more technical book, it would be again this Rhys Burke's book, Simulation Hypothesis from last year. That is more technical one. I try to really question moral and ethical questions and questions of meaning of life, essentially.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, as I was kind of like testing out some of the arguments for the simulation hypothesis just with people I know, one of the people I was talking to, we kind of like had a little bit of a discussion on morality and like how there's a way in which I guess morality as being something different from how we describe the world, but rather how we like ought to behave within the world is something that you have to get from outside the system. And there's like different arguments that can be made, but I know that's kind of a what is it? I think Kant, Immanuel
Kant argument, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And also like a lot of like Christian arguments, like for God through morality, like the moral argument for God and things like that. Yeah.
Actually, it's interesting that you touched the Christian side of it. I'm coming from Orthodox Christianity, obviously. My background is not in US, which is mostly Protestant. And Orthodox Christianity is much closer to panentheism concepts in religion. And that understanding of God as a being who created it all and continues to control it, like setting the rules, control it, and sending the God's Son in terms of Christ to help us, to navigate us. That is very close to what I kind of describe in the book. So it's a panentheistic view of the world, where we still have the free will. So unlike pantheism, which
right.
you know, we don't have a free will. I actually believe in free will. I enjoyed your video, by the way, on free will. I watched it.
Oh, yeah.
So I think the argument for free will is stronger than absence of it. And once you think about concept, and I also, again, if you just apply logic, okay, there is a creator of the world, and he created us who have free will. Why would that happen? What is the purpose of that? And purpose, there are not that many reasons actually that could be. If you think about it, what are the reasons to have free will, live in this imperfect world? What are you gonna do with this free will? What is it for? And that's where I slowly, through the chapters, I come to this conclusion that actually world without life is dull, it's boring. There is nothing interesting about that world. There's nothing interesting. World was created, and the beings that have intelligence and free will are introduced. What's they gonna do with it? Of course, to create, to make a diverse world, to change the world and make it an interesting place. So that's kind of the concept. And if you come up with other reasons, why would that initial, arguments create, what would it lead to? I actually cannot come up with anything else. What would be the other reason? And that's the concept I explore in the book.
Yeah, it's really a great book to kind of get a feel for that, I guess, quest for the meaning of life, and also like connecting it to the simulation hypothesis and like building it within this science fictional world of like mitras and like within the simulator world and the real world. But I don't want to get too much into that for the people that want to read it. But it's interesting. I'm actually currently going to an Orthodox church myself, just as an inquirer. It's funny because like I guess part of the reason I was interested in the simulation hypothesis was through this a Christian apologist inspiring philosophy, and he makes a sort of idealist argument for God's existence, where everything can be boiled down to information, and then that leads to the, I guess, bedrock or the fundamental nature of reality being something that can contain information, whether it be a simulation or a mind. And he argues for the mind, but using like the digital physics argument for that. And it's fascinating because he argues from a Orthodox, I mean, he's not Orthodox himself, but he does like support his argument within Christianity from the Orthodox panentheism, which is very interesting.
Yeah. It kind of getting traction now, and you know, when there are different disconnected things, but then you feel they kind of all click together. You kind of say, oh, there is something about it. And when things are not connecting and everything kind of only goes apart, then no, probably that is not truth. So truth has this interesting kind of connecting and clicking power between disconnected things. And I think all this came together now with simulation hypothesis. I mean, from all sides, from philosophical physics, biology, and philosophy, from all sides, it's kind of clicking. And I think it's gonna only be more and more in the direction. I mean, mainstream.
Yeah, I know for at least myself, and being kind of raised in a modern society where I'm having sort of a disconnection to the ancient way of looking at things, I noticed that at least the simulation hypothesis was something that allowed me to get a better understanding, just because it's kind of like more graspable for me in understanding these types of things, because like we interact with digital worlds all the time. And so by being able to kind of like see that metaphor and connect it to your own existence, it just makes it kind of easier to understand like the creator-creation distinction that goes on.
Yeah, the biggest problem with Christianity, like in Protestant sense, and I went to Protestant church for 5 years when in US, I can tell you that one big disconnect I see, and I still couldn't reconcile it till today, is that, okay, he is the God who is perfect, kind, and so on. Why would he make us suffer so much? And now we don't suffer that much now, but not because of God. We don't suffer so much now because of technology and our own achievements as humans. We invented antibiotics, all kinds of technologies, you know, stress medicine, anything. All that made our life more comfortable. We learned how to produce food. But if you look at life on average person, like in 13th century, that is like average lifespan is like 35 years old. I mean, that is average lifespan back then. People didn't live long. And what they had to live, it was like pure like fight with elements. I mean, common cold would kill so many people back then. And it just, we forgot about this because we made ourselves, our world so comfortable. And in this sense, Gnostic concept from Christianity actually very kind of, they fit better than the Protestant view of perfect being who created this world for us to enjoy and suffer from our own sin. But then why would animals suffer? They didn't sin at all, but animals suffer even more, even today, from our sins. Like, I don't know, we farm all these poor chickens in huge farms. I don't know, they probably don't have feelings, but it's definitely not a pleasant state there. And also from natural things. So everything, aside from modern humans who managed more or less make the world comfortable to some degree. Again, as people age, they meet more disease anyways, even like that. So they still suffer. And So why so much suffering, even for innocent animals? And I point out this in a book. Those things cannot be reconciled with Protestant view of Christian view, and that would bother it. It cannot be reconciled with Orthodox Church and as well in standard sense. So only simulation theory and maybe agnostic concept can somewhat explain, because their view is world is imperfect because the being who created it is not perfect. In Gnostic, it was Sophia's demiurge, I think.
Yeah, the
It's just a
demiurge.
myth. It's just a myth. But the point is, they try to explain imperfections in the world through that side. But simulation theory has a much more credible and scientific explanation. Our world is imperfect because there are limits, physical limits. So we have these physical limits to that, but also probably intellectual meaning of how this world was designed originally. So if the perfect being created this world, it would be perfect. Trust me. It's not perfect. Therefore, the creator is not perfect being. And yeah.
It's interesting because like this kind of topic has been something that I've been, I guess, wrestling with for a little while now, or a while now, because there's a whole period where like for a whole year I was writing this, I guess, like a dialogue between this guy. I don't know if you're familiar with the term of antinatalism, which is it's like a ethical position that it is immoral to create life, because within the person's life there's going to be some amount of inevitable suffering, and suffering is negative for creatures that exist. Therefore, like there should, like, it's better to not exist than to exist and experience suffering. And the dialogue is all about like whether, like, what is the cost of bringing in a life to this world, and it's fascinating. Like I go back, not back and forth, but I try to really understand it and wrestle with the problem of suffering, and that's kind of the thing too, is like even within simulationism, there is still kind of the problem of suffering that does occur, and also I guess raises the almost noble heroic stance to go up against the demiurge, the less moral creator of the world, in kind of a bit of a rebellion in some sense. But yeah.
It's almost like in pages in my book. We have a character like that, right?
Yeah, yeah, I know, and that's like very much the argument that the antinatalists make. Is that it would be better to not live and undergo suffering than to live with certain amounts of happinesses or pleasures, but still having to face some amounts of horrible suffering that you'll have to live through.
Even I myself, I'm being a programmer. I did some simple games for fun. I wrote some games. Of course, the characters, AI that plays the characters is not capable of understanding what we can understand. But I almost like feel confidence in myself that I could write a game where my creatures would not suffer. But on the other hand, am I like too proud? And I'm like suffering from the sin of pride, because it's one of the 7 deadly sins, right? And I think that I can do that, but maybe I can't. Maybe I will make a mistake. And
can you like create a world with free will that still doesn't have any sort of suffering within it too?
Yeah, that is self-confidence. It seems like I have it, but I'm almost sure I'm falling for the trap of pride, and I probably will not be able to create such a world where everybody will be happy and there will be no suffering. So provided there is a free will. Of course, you can create world where no free will, and then everything pre-programmed to be perfectly fine and function. Okay, you move your hand from here to here, and that's all you do in your life, and that's it. It's fine, it's fixed, it's functional. But once you introduce the free will, you don't know what the creature will do. And suddenly, when you have many of them, you don't know what they all do together, and what kind of world will be after 10 years of them doing something for free. And then you lose this control. There's no control anymore. And what kind of world it will be? That's interesting, right?
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah, with the I don't know. There's kind of this question, I guess, regarding free will, because for within certain understandings of it is kind of like necessarily tied into consciousness, where because we're conscious, we have the ability to like direct our attention and intention and actions and things like that. And there's arguments for why that would be like free will is kind of like necessarily tied in with that, I guess. And so like it kind of raises the question, okay, if there was a world without free will, would that also be a world without consciousness? And I know for like some of the antinatalists arguments, like, yes, that would still be a better world, like without any sort of life in it. But like you had said, a world without life in it, where just static objects, is kind of dull and boring.
There's no purpose in it at all.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. I had a couple of other questions. Let's see. Actually, I managed to get through pretty much all. Oh, I wanted to ask you: is the title of your book, is that sort of like a play on words for the Answers in Genesis group?
There is a little bit of that too, but really the purpose of the book, like I said, was to, of course, give my vision of purpose in life, regardless of who is simulating us. Because if you think about it, the concept I developed will be true regardless whether, and specifically in that chapter where you have Yefet at the final talking with the voice, I specifically keep that conversation open-ended in the end, to point out that there can be multiple versions who is the simulator actually, the true person in control of everything. And regardless of that, the purpose of life that I develop in the absolute chapter will be true in both cases. So that is, I intentionally did that to point out that purpose and the concept of stories of our lives, it doesn't matter where we live, when we live, or in what kind of simulation we live. The purpose stays true in all of those possibilities. So that's why it's universal, and I think it's quite interesting. The other point in the book was to give answers to paradoxes through simulation, because there are many open questions in physics and so on, and it answers those questions. So book provides answers, and that's why I use that in the title, because I give answers, I don't pose questions. Well, in the beginning I do pose questions, but then I give also the answers. So I didn't want to write a mysterious book with all these questions unanswered. I actually wanted to give answers, which is usually harder than just stay open-ended.
That's something else that I guess is interesting within the simulation hypothesis is that with certain areas of like Christianity or materialism, that there's this, I guess, rejection of the God that would create a world that contains a great amount of suffering within it. Over the course of my like developing arguments for the debate that I did, I kind of like tried to really think of like what are the different reasons for why civilizations might want to create simulations. And one of the things that kind of came to me was kind of, I guess, the problem of technology, where as you scale up as a civilization, you make it much easier for creatures to like maximize their capacities and what they do. Like they can, like you can kind of change the world in a way just by being a normal person in the year, I don't know, 3000 or something like that. And that kind of raised the concern for like, okay, what if you have a society in which like there's the technological capacities to basically do whatever you want? What types of people would you want within that society? Like, for sure, you wouldn't want sort of the nihilistic, pessimistic school shooter type in which they could just like, I don't know, 3D print some sort of viral disease that they could just set off over some sort of densely populated area and then wipe out, I don't know, like millions of people. That would be something like you definitely want to kind of keep from happening. And that's kind of the thing is like, as technology increases, you can't regulate it as well. Like I also follow a couple of accounts on Twitter, which is all about like setting up the blueprints for 3D printing guns. And so it's interesting to see like once there is the information that's out there, because that's the thing with information is you can't just like lock it down. It kind of spreads. And so if like the technology makes it so that information can kind of exceed our capacities, you'd want to make sure that the people within such a civilization aren't going to be ones that will like in a fit of rage kind of like try to destroy it. And so it kind of raised, I guess, the ethical concern or maybe ethical necessity in like, if we're wanting to continue civilization, then maybe the best course of action would be to produce simulations of for ourselves, just in order to test the fortitude of character of people so that we can trust them to live within a technologically rich society in which they have the capacities to do evil, but we would have at least a high probability that they wouldn't do evil.
Well, in our current world, we have people and examples that went essentially rogue. Like take, for example, Osama bin Laden. He had everything. He had billions of dollars. I mean, he could do anything with his life, but what he did was this evil act. So why he did that, and having everything already, what a typical person can desire in this world. So this is a very interesting question to explore. And also, I have a chapter, the Mr. C chapter, that actually explores the point of control and how the world is controlled and ruled. And there are a few interesting positions there, including the inherent corruption of humans. So I personally believe in a biblical concept that we are sinful inherently. We have that in each of us, and we sinful inherently, yet we have a spark of divine as well from a perfect being. So this constant struggle and this duality actually in everything in our world, right? From yin yang in Chinese, you have to have both sides, to duality in physics and the duality in Descartes. Everything is dual by some reason. True, false in Aristotle logic concept. There has to be two, and that is very interesting in general. Why it is like that? Why we do need both? And the point in the chapter essentially says that why don't we create AI that controls everything in a perfect way? Because humans are evil and we cannot trust them to have absolute power. So let's have some new creature, AI, in that conversation to control us instead of inherently evil creatures to control us or whatever. You can say one person can control a body of person. To me, it doesn't matter, because a group of people is to me is the same as one person if they have same intentions. So there is no difference. So yeah, it's an interesting point to explore in general. And simulating control is also can be useful, of course, for research purposes. In fact, you reminded me of a book, Simulacron 3. It's a book, I forgot the author name, but I actually watched a German movie based on this book. It's a weird movie, low budget and so on. But the concept there was also about simulation within simulation. And what they did there is they had a simulation created to research marketing. So they tried to build a society of virtual people that live their life and for marketing purposes, like to know how to do sales and so on. So it definitely coming too. I mean, as a programmer, I can tell you, we're definitely gonna end up within 10, 20 years with some, there will be no humans, of course, using computers, but some more authentic and realistic simulations where each individual will be simulated as an object without full conscience, but In
Mhm.
fact, it's probably done now by economists already to
Right.
simulate certain economic events.
Yeah, I remember there's this episode from Black Mirror, the television show, where there's it's basically like a love story between these two characters, but it replays the love story over and over to try and figure out which it's like them they're put through these tests of going on dates with different people, and then they see if it works or not, and then they date somebody else, and then sometimes they'll go back and forth, and it's kind of this testing of all of like connections between people until these two kind of like figure out that the system that's putting them on dates is wrong, and they want to go with each other outside and try to just like go against the system, and then it's those two people that go against the system that triggers you like find out, oh, this was all done within a simulation, and it's for in the real world it's like a dating app where you take the two like bites of the consciousnesses for different individuals and then have them find out which people they're tested for, in which like there's going to be this kind of love connection between the two people, and so yeah, it's like Black Mirror is really a great television show, especially because it kind of raises these types of ethical questions for like what how moral would it be to like create a simulation in which the creatures within it are suffering, and like even like if you could take a snapshot of somebody's consciousness of say like Hitler or something like that, and then would you want to put them into this sort of eternal hell and torment type state just as punishment for what they did to everyone else? And yeah, it's a really good show, especially because a lot of, well, I can think of quite a few at least that are directly related to simulationism.
It's definitely a breakthrough show, for sure. The point of suffering, again, we come back to it many times, is that that is one of the most important points, that the world is created by an imperfect creator, and we just there is really no logical ways to explain otherwise. Unfortunately, there is a possibility, and I pointed in one of the videos, that there might be that assumption, but our whole thought, all the way from ancient Greece, starting with Aristotle concept that true is not equal false, and there is like source of something and there is a consequence. These two fundamental things kind of built our whole mindset as humans. And what if those initial assumptions are not true? And I question that.
Mm.
Then it will be very difficult to, if you cannot use logic to draw conclusions, that will be really difficult, but it's possible. And one of the interesting things in physics, for example, we know, like if you take black hole object, we all know that black hole close to the surface, the time slows down. So if you are outside watching Alice fall in a black hole, she will be endlessly falling into it for you as observer. So she will never actually get into the black hole because endlessly the time slows down on this close to the surface. But for Alice, going into black hole, she will go into black hole. She will go through the surface and get into it. So how these two things can be at the same time, that contradicts logic. And there are many examples like that with Zeno paradox and many other things. It's what if logic is actually not what's ultimate rule of the world? Then it will be really. I haven't seen many publications in this area. Like, what if logic is not really functional? That really difficult to imagine that kind of world.
Well, I don't. Yeah, you mentioned in the book a reference to Gödel and his incompleteness theorem. Like there are certain things that are going to be true about logical systems that aren't going to be found within the logical system itself, and plus there's also other components of like certain things are built upon assumptions that we're making that are like kind of unjustified in a sense, but like they're kind of like almost necessary to assume just in order to get like the ball rolling with any sort of like system of intelligence of like what is it, the yeah, there's different things, but like the causality is sort of like one necessary kind of assumption just to kind of get the ball rolling. I got a question from Pleasure of Doubt in the chat. He's somebody that comes on the channel quite often. Hey guys, sorry I missed the beginning. Wouldn't we be just as immoral as God if we make simulations with conscious beings who suffer? The way I put it, if the beings in Grand Theft Auto were conscious, it would be unconscionable for us to play it. Don't we have a duty to care for our creations?
Yeah, well, yeah, of course we do. But again, I think the creator is actually moral. So I have pretty dark view of our creator, direct creator of this simulation. So I know it's a little bit pessimistic, but again, it takes a whole book to understand why you still need to be positive. And there is still good that you can create within this world. And the table that is created in that book, the main character creates, is actually a representation of ultimate good, absolute good. And it will be true in any nested level of simulation, or whether creator is bad or good. It doesn't matter. It is absolute good that he created. And I think that's what we need to do. It will actually make us happy. I did it with my own life. I involved in creating certain things, and they make me happy. And less worried about stuff too. So I think that's what younger generation I would recommend to do. Just do something that you can do well and create. Don't get involved too much into politics or playing games and things like that.
Yeah, and that's something that I partially have been wrestling with the Antinatalist kind of script that I actually had a live reading for it with a couple of friends just on my channel. It's like 3.5 hours long, so it's kind of a long thing, and it's not like very entertaining either. It was really just kind of like a cathartic experience for me, and just trying to articulate these different arguments and like battle them against each other in a sort of logical fashion. But the thing that I kind of, I guess, reside with it is what I got from reading Nietzsche. Actually, is he kind of like paints the case that even if the creator of this world is evil or beyond good and evil, then that doesn't really matter for you within it, because you're like the byproduct of the creation. And it's a way in which, like, even though Nietzsche is like pits himself up against Platonism, it's something that's kind of true within both areas of philosophy. Because like for somebody like Socrates, who was given the option of leave Athens or die for corrupting the youth through his philosophy, Socrates accepted death. And there's a way in which, like, if you're doing what you like if you are doing what you love, living how you want to live, I'm like explaining it poorly, but
it's exactly the point of Nietzsche as well, because Nietzsche literally says, create your own world, create your own microcosms around you, surround you with people you love, do what you love within, even world is imperfect by design, you will reach maximum happiness that you can within this realm. And same goes with Gnosticism, because Gnosticism also points out that we have this spark of divine being in us. The world is controlled by evil being. So what you're gonna do? You just research, you learn. And as we learn physics, how the world is designed, we learn the physics, biology, we design new drugs and medicines. We actually improving our own life. Again, compare our modern lifestyle, length of our life and quality of our life of people in Middle Ages. I mean, that is almost incomparable and incomprehensible when little children aged 9, 10 would just die from hunger. That's just hard to even imagine now. And that our own drive to research how world works, be curious, do things, you can actually build your own nice world within imperfect world. I think that is the only answer. And many philosophers, as we can see, come to the same conclusion. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a good message to kind of end on too. So yeah. Thanks for joining me, Yuri. I put the link to your book down below as well as to your channel and Twitter also. So anybody that wants to can go check those out. And I definitely recommend the book. It's very easy to read through and get a lot out of it. Like very relatable with the character and a really fun and interesting story.
I try to be not too wordy.
Yeah.
Thank you, John.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I'll end the stream now.